The morning in Chicago was colder than usual. The sky was still gray when I walked into the glass tower of Atlas Dynamics. Past the revolving doors, a long hallway stretched out with cold white lights and steady footsteps tapping against polished stone. At a glance, everything looked normal, but the moment that emergency meeting email hit my inbox at 7 in the morning, I knew something was off. The second floor conference room overlooked the Chicago River, fog curling low over the water. Inside were only two people: Cole Matthews from HR, sitting perfectly upright with his hands folded on the table, and Helena Brooks, the company's chief technology officer, the same woman who once promised I'd be leading an entire cybersecurity team. Cole didn't smile. Helena avoided my eyes the moment I walked in. They didn't need to say a word. I already knew what kind of meeting this was. I sat down. The chair gave a faint squeak. Silence stretched for a few seconds before Cole finally spoke, using that carefully polished tone people reserve for termination talks. He slid a tablet toward me. On the screen was a photo taken from a distance. I walked into the Harbor Sentinel building last Thursday evening. My usual meeting with Raphael's advisory group. Cole said they'd received a tip about my after-hours activities. His voice tried to sound neutral, but the judgment seeped through every syllable. I didn't answer. Helena kept her eyes locked on the edge of the table, her fingers tightening around a pen. Cole shifted to the conflict of interest clause in my contract, emphasizing the word betrayal as if I had sold Atlas technology to a rival. I placed one hand on the table, steady, refusing to give them the reaction they expected. I asked him whether he had reviewed the advisory carve-outs. He ignored the question and continued his script about Atlas having zero tolerance for anything that could harm the company's reputation. He called my actions a violation of the spirit of commitment, a phrase companies like to use when they have no real proof. Helena spoke a few times, her voice soft but evasive. You have to understand. Your role is too important right now. You put us in a difficult position. I saw the conflict in her eyes, but she chose Cole's side anyway. At Atlas, loyalty belonged to titles, not truth. Cole eventually pushed a stack of printed documents toward me. Meeting minutes, a termination notice, a conflict of interest admission form. I didn't sign. I read every line, pointing out vague phrases that could make me admit to something that never happened. Cole was irritated, but with Helena in the room, he forced himself to stay composed. I finally looked up and said slowly, "You're right. From now on, I'll focus on one position only." Cole froze, surprised at how easily I seemed to accept it. Helena's eyes flicked up, unsettled. They thought this moment would break me. They didn't understand. After 3 years stretched thin, this felt like the final knot finally loosening. Cole called security to escort me while I packed my things. I stood and placed my access badge on the table, a small navy card with the Atlas logo I had swiped every day for 3 years. The moment I pulled my hand back, something inside me felt lighter. The hallway buzzed with whispers. People lowered their heads, pretending to work. Others glanced over. Noah, a new hire I had mentored a few times, stood still watching me, lips pressed together like he wanted to speak but couldn't. I opened my drawer. A white ceramic mug, a small plant that had survived 3 desk moves, a sheet of system architecture notes I once sketched during a sleepless night. I placed each item into the box. No rush, no regret. Down in the lobby, cold air rushed in as the glass doors opened. The wind hit my face, sharp but refreshing. I took a long breath. For 3 years, I kept their system standing. Now it wasn't my burden anymore. My phone buzzed as I reached the parking lot. A message from Raphael appeared. The full-time offer still stands. If you're ready, let's talk this afternoon. I looked at the Atlas badge one last time before dropping it into the box. Then I texted back, "I've got the whole day. I'm ready." When I started the car and pulled out of the lot, one thought crossed my mind. Maybe you've walked out of a door like I did, lighter than you expected, surprised by your own relief. If you're following this journey, tell me where you're listening from. And if stories about waking up, walking out, and reclaiming your worth speak to you, don't forget to follow. The next chapter holds things even I didn't see coming. 3 years ago, back when I was working at a small cybersecurity firm in Seattle, I received an email inviting me to interview with Atlas Dynamics. I still remember the feeling, It was like a massive door suddenly opening in front of me. Atlas was one of the most critical logistics platforms in the United States, handling shipping data from hundreds of warehouses, thousands of trucks, and millions of daily orders. They wanted to rebuild the entire security architecture, and Helena Brooks, the chief technology officer, told me she wanted someone with the vision to lead everything. When I flew to Chicago for the interview, Helena met me in a large glass walled conference room overlooking a network of highways that moved like living veins. She spoke about transforming Atlas into the safest and smartest logistics platform in the country and how they would build a 5-person team around me to bring that vision to life. The way she described the future made me believe I would be part of something big and lasting. I accepted the offer immediately. The first few months were genuinely memorable. My team had 4 or 5 people, each with their own strengths. We debated intrusion detection models, ran endless experiments, and tuned every corner of the system. Sprint meetings always ended with jokes, and whenever the weather was nice, we walked to the river for quick snacks in the afternoon. I was responsible for the core architecture, but I still had time to work out, cook, and call my family every night. Everything felt like it was finally falling into place. Then came the first strategic restructure. Atlas announced it needed to streamline to focus on growth. One of my senior engineers was let go. Helena told me not to worry and promised they would hire again next quarter, but the next quarter passed and no one new appeared. Then came the merger. Finance froze several more positions. One teammate left for a better opportunity. Another was reassigned to the product team due to staffing shortages. No one replaced them. By the end of the second year, I was the only one left in security. Once I became the only person who understood the entire architecture, my life changed completely. Every upgrade project, every new layer of defense, every patch workflow fell on my shoulders. Days were filled with meetings, incidents, and support tickets. Nights with code, tests, and adjustments. Every evening after 10, the system load graph slowly crept into the red. During big data syncs, I was the only one around to reset processes and watch for anomalies. Night after night, I watched the clock hit 3 in the morning, then 4, unable to step away. One night, after dozing off on a pile of logs, I woke to a soft knock. It was Cole from Human Resources holding a stack of papers and asking me to sign my performance review. I was half asleep, head pounding, but I signed because it felt like one small task in a mountain of others. In that moment, I realized everyone had gotten used to seeing me in the office at hours. No one should be working. I tried again and again to warn them that having one person own the entire architecture was dangerously reckless. In a large meeting, I laid out every risk clearly and proposed hiring at least 3 new positions to distribute responsibility. The CFO sat with his arms crossed and said something I will never forget. Maybe the issue is with documentation, not staffing. Helena glanced at me with sympathy, but she repeated the same line she always did. Let's wait until next quarter and see the budget. That was the moment I understood my warnings no longer mattered. Something hollow started to grow inside me. I knew I was being exploited, but I also knew that if I left, the system could collapse in weeks. I thought about the operations team, people who had done nothing wrong but would be dragged into chaos if the platform failed. That kept me anchored. My mother called often, saying I sounded exhausted, asking why I never stopped working. My boyfriend at the time told me no company deserves someone's health. I never answered. I just stared at my Atlas badge on the table, feeling like I was carrying the entire building on my shoulders. One winter night, snow pressed against the windows, and the server room hummed quietly. I stared at the network diagram taped to the wall, the one I had redrawn endlessly over 2 years, full of overlapping lines and tiny blue ink notes. It was the only map that truly reflected what lived inside my head. I stood there for a long time, staring at it like I was looking at a miniature version of myself. I whispered something I had avoided admitting for a long time. One day, they'll regret not listening to me. The real question is whether I'll still be here when that happens. I didn't know the answer would arrive much sooner than I expected. After months of exhaustion, I had almost stopped paying attention to anything outside Atlas until the organizers of a cybersecurity conference in Las Vegas emailed to invite me as a speaker. I had written a paper on adaptive security architecture, and they had highlighted it in their program. When I passed the invitation to management, Atlas immediately declined, saying the travel budget had been cut. I was not surprised. They had cut things far more important than a business trip, so this felt insignificant. But a few weeks later, when the organizers reached out again, saying they wanted to introduce me as one of the experts behind the security system for the largest logistics platform in the country, Atlas's PR team suddenly changed their tone. They told me to prepare slides, send them for approval, and make sure to emphasize the company's image. I laughed when I read the email. Turning me down was easy. Losing free publicity was not. I flew to Las Vegas in mid-June. The moment I stepped outside the airport, the heat slapped my face like a sheet of dry air. The conference was held at a large hotel on the Las Vegas Strip, full of noise, lights, and an energy that Chicago winters could never offer. Standing backstage waiting for my turn, I felt a kind of nervous excitement I had not felt in a long time. For once, I was about to speak about something I believed in, not report numbers to a CFO. When I stepped onto the stage, the lights hit me hard enough to make me blink, but the moment I saw the full audience, the tension disappeared. I opened by describing a behavioral attack I once handled. The slides showed unusual movement patterns across the system, and I broke down how the attacker shifted tactics once detected. The audience followed closely. I kept the talk technical enough for insiders but clear enough so others could still stay with me. During the Q&A, several people stood and asked detailed questions about the anomaly detection model I had presented. I answered with complete honesty. Time slipped by so fast that when I stepped off the stage, I no longer felt like I had carried a heavy load. It felt more like taking a deep breath after years of stale air. Right below the stage, a man in his early 30s waited for me. White shirt, a small notebook in hand. He introduced himself as Rafael Moreno. His first question was not about technology or implementation details. It was something entirely different. Do you design systems for hackers or for humans? I paused for a few seconds. In meetings with the CFO or Helena, no one had ever asked anything that deep. They cared about cost, speed, and scalability. Raphael did not. He wanted to understand the philosophy behind my designs. We sat at a small table outside the conference hall. Raphael told me about his work at Harbor Sentinel, a growing fintech company known for its investment app for young users. They wanted to build security from the foundation up, not patch fires. He had worked at a large company before, where a tiny oversight cost millions, because leadership ignored engineers' warnings. Listening to him felt like hearing someone describe Atlas under a different name. Raphael said plainly that his team needed someone with architectural vision to review what they were building. The advisory work happened only on weekends, over video calls, just reviewing documents and models. No access to production, no data from Atlas. He emphasized that the contract would spell out no conflicts of interest. I listened as something conflicted stirred inside me. On one hand, it was the opportunity I had quietly wished for, a chance to work with people who respected the craft. On the other hand, it felt like betraying a company that had piled so much responsibility on me. But when I remembered all the ignored warnings, the nights alone in the server room, and the way Atlas only cared about their image at this conference, I realized my loyalty had always been one-sided. Raphael handed me the advisory proposal. The pay for 2 weekends a month was higher than my entire monthly salary at Atlas. I could not deny the jolt I felt, that strange shock of being valued correctly. I told Raphael I needed time to review the legal details. He nodded immediately, saying he wanted everything to be transparent too. That night, back in the hotel room, I read the contract carefully and emailed Raphael with questions about every clause. When he replied, ending with a line saying he looked forward to working with me, I knew what my answer was going to be. The next morning, as I left the conference, I tucked my badge with my name printed on it into my bag. A small badge, but I knew it marked a turning point. For the first time in years, I did not feel like a firefighter patching a collapsing system. I felt like a real professional, respected, heard. I had no idea that this small decision would lead to everything that came after, but if I had the chance again, I would still step onto that stage and I would still say yes to Raphael. because that was the day I finally saw my own worth. After the trip to Las Vegas, my life split into two completely different rhythms. From the outside, my work week still looked like that of any cybersecurity engineer, but inside, I was living in two opposite worlds, so different that even I sometimes felt like I was playing two roles. From Monday to Friday, I went right back into the grind at Atlas. Every morning began with a long list of unresolved tickets, support requests from operations, bug reports, and attack alerts. There were late afternoon calls to fix issues that should have belonged to the entire team. And night after night, long after most people went home, I stayed in front of the screen watching logs pour by. Atlas treated my ability to handle everything quickly as a built in feature of the system. No one asked what I needed, and no one cared how I managed to do it all. Weekends were a different story. The moment I joined the call with the Harbor Sentinel team, it felt like the air around me lightened. They always prepared documents in advance, carefully noted every suggestion I made, and asked why I chose each technical path. Raphael usually opened the meeting with one simple question I rarely heard at Atlas: "Did you get any rest?" Every time he asked it, I paused. Not because I did not know the answer, but because I realized no one had asked me that in a long time. The cultural contrast between the two sides became so clear that I felt like I was living in parallel realities. At Atlas, everything I did was treated as part of the machinery. At Harbor Sentinel, every sentence I spoke was treated as valuable insight. A few nights during the week, when I finished work but my mind was still spinning, I stopped by the community center in the immigrant neighborhood near my apartment. I taught teenagers how to set strong passwords, how to spot phishing emails, and how to avoid giving away their personal information. They were always curious, asking everything from what real hackers look like to how a harmless link can steal their account. One of them, a boy named Leo, once handed me a sheet of paper he had scribbled on, a network diagram with a shield in the middle and a short thank you note. I kept that drawing, not because it looked nice, but because for the first time in years, I felt my effort was seen in a genuine way. But even with those bright moments, my body began to push back. I lost sleep for days at a time, waking after only a few hours because I remembered a process I had not checked. I skipped meals and replaced them with coffee. My best friend saw me on a Thursday night, studied my face, and said, "You are working for two companies and for a whole community, but none of them is doing the same for you." I avoided the comment. I was not ready to confront it. Meanwhile, Helena started acting strangely. I knew she had seen the conference website where my talk was posted. The next morning, she sent me a private email. "Remember that you represent Atlas, not an independent advisor." The sentence looked harmless, but the tone felt like she wanted to pull a leash I had not noticed before. In a meeting with the CFO, when I presented a technical risk, Helena jumped in with, "We have worked very hard to keep the system stable, even though I was the only one actually responsible." I sat there listening, and I understood that her quiet resentment was beginning to surface. I did not know that trouble was forming elsewhere. Jared, a contractor who had worked with my team the previous year before being cut in the downsizing, happened to see me entering the Harbor Sentinel building during a weekend session. He snapped a photo and sent it to Cole with a vague note: "Not sure if this violates a non-compete. You take a look." Cole did not miss the opportunity. HR had been under pressure from escalating turnover after the merger, and anything that shifted attention away from them was convenient fuel. I had no idea any of this was happening. I kept moving between two worlds. At the end of long days, I often returned home after dark. I dropped my bag on the chair, took my Atlas badge off my neck, and set it beside my Las Vegas conference tag and Leo's drawing. 3 items from 3 different parts of my life, sitting next to each other like they were waiting for me to understand something. I sat on the edge of the bed, took my shoes off, and told myself I just needed to hold on a little longer. Once Atlas hired more people, things would ease. Once Harbor Sentinel finalized their new architecture, I could cut back my sessions. That my body was just tired for the moment. But when I opened my laptop, the newest email sat at the top of my inbox, its subject line stopping me immediately. "About some of your after-hours activities." My chest tightened. I clicked it, and before I even finished the first line, I knew the undercurrent I thought I could outrun had finally reached me. I looked again at the three things on the table: the Atlas badge, the conference badge, the drawing from a kid who believed I was protecting people. Three markers, three reminders, three different paths. And I understood then that the time I kept promising myself had already run out. I walked into the office the next morning with a weight on my chest that felt like a stone had been set there overnight. The email from HR didn't explain anything. It only told me to come in at 9. I knew Cole would be behind this meeting. He always preferred small private rooms, the kind that made you feel examined before you even sat down. At exactly 9, I knocked on the conference room door at the end of the hallway. Cole opened it with a polite smile that looked painfully forced. His voice was even more strained. He just wanted to clarify a few small things to ensure the company's procedures were being followed. He closed the door, pulled out a chair, and sat across from me in a way designed to look casual to anyone watching. He started with soft, harmless questions. I heard you have been teaching at a community center. Sounds meaningful. I told him it was just a few small sessions for teenagers, nothing connected to Atlas or any company. Cole nodded while jotting down notes, as if collecting evidence for a report I had not seen yet. Then he got to the real point. There is information suggesting you were seen at the headquarters of a fintech company over the weekend. Can you explain why? I did not dodge. I handed him the printed advisory contract. I made it clear that my role only involved reviewing theoretical architecture, no real data, no production access. Every clause is written explicitly by Harbor Sentinel's legal team to prevent conflicts of interest. Cole didn't look satisfied. He held the document but didn't read it, flipping a few pages before lifting his head with a sharper expression. Do you know that Harbor Sentinel is considered a direct competitor to Atlas? I answered that they operate in fintech and Atlas operates in logistics. The systems are nothing alike. But Cole pushed back, quoting vague policy sections. He said what mattered wasn't the exact wording, but the spirit of the policy, and that any activity posing a risk to the company's image needed to be examined. The way he pressed the word spirit made it clear he was determined to place me in the violation column no matter what. The soft interrogation dragged on for nearly an hour. Cole ended it with a smile, pretending this had been a constructive conversation, then said he would report everything to upper management. As I walked out, I knew this wasn't over. That afternoon, Helena joined a closed meeting with Cole and the CFO. I happened to see them entering the glass room, but couldn't hear anything. I learned later from someone in finance what had happened inside. The CFO complained about rising overtime costs, minor incidents that forced operations to work late, and asked Helena why the system required so much manual intervention. Instead of admitting that Atlas had forced me to shoulder an impossible workload, Helena claimed I was difficult to collaborate with and made independent decisions without informing anyone. She said I acted like the only person who understood the system and refused to share responsibility. Cole added that my external advisory work clearly showed I was distancing myself from the organization. The three of them quickly aligned. They would use conflict of interest as the reason to terminate my contract. A simple explanation, easy to justify, and most importantly, a message to everyone else. By the time Cole called me into the room on Monday morning, I already sensed what was coming. The rest unfolded like the beginning of this story, but even now I remember the exact feeling when I heard Cole say the word terminated. It felt like a door shutting quietly but firmly. No shock, just emptiness. 3 years of work reduced to a single sentence. I didn't beg. I didn't defend myself. I only asked for a few lines to be corrected so I wouldn't accidentally admit to something I never did. Cole looked annoyed but had no choice. When I finished signing, I glanced through the glass wall and saw Noah, the young developer I had mentored, standing outside. His fists were clenched like he wanted to walk in, but he stepped back when our eyes met. For a moment, that almost broke me. Then I left the room. Cole sent a company-wide email 10 minutes later. The subject line sounded neutral, but the content was full of implication. Mia has chosen her own path. Atlas remains committed to a strict policy against conflicts of interest. The final line felt like a small kick at my reputation, as if I had betrayed the company, not the other way around. I packed up my desk. By the time I reached the door, my Atlas badge had already been deactivated. I stood outside the building for a moment, took a deep breath, and looked at the three things in my pocket: the Las Vegas conference tag, Leo's drawing of a shield, and the Atlas badge had become nothing more than a useless piece of plastic. 3 fragments of 3 different worlds. My phone buzzed. A message from Raphael. Are you holding up? If you want to talk, I am free after 2. The message felt like a doorway opening just as the one behind me had closed. I walked toward the parking lot, the Chicago wind pushed against my face. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel like I was running away from something. I felt like I was walking toward somewhere new, a place I couldn't fully see yet, but definitely not here. On my first day walking into Harbor Sentinel's office, it felt like stepping into an entirely different world from the one I had just left behind. The space was filled with light, glass walls open to the street below, and people were speaking softly instead of chasing endless incidents like at Atlas. Raphael gave me a quick tour and introduced me to everyone. Each person shook my hand, said their name and role without tension or guardedness. I realized I had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely welcomed. When we sat down in a small meeting room at the end of the hallway, Raphael said something that made me pause for several seconds. Here, if you have to stay up more than twice a quarter, it means we designed something wrong. I looked at him, trying to decide if it was just a slogan, but the way he said it told me he meant it. At Atlas, staying up all night was a default. Here, it was treated as a system failure, not an individual burden. My new team had 10 people, each with a specialty: threat intelligence, incident response, cloud security, compliance, crypto analysis, internal audit, all the roles I used to cover on my own at Atlas. When we sat down for our first team meeting, one of them asked me a question I had never heard in 3 years. How do you want to design this team so no one turns into a lone hero? I froze. At Atlas, they treated me like a machine built to absorb everything. Here, they were asking how to make sure no one became the version of me I had been forced to be. The first days at Harbor Sentinel passed with a lightness that felt both comforting and strange. No one dumped responsibilities on me. No one pulled me into meetings just to rubber stamp decisions. No one acted like resolving incidents in minutes was normal. That first afternoon, when I checked the time and realized it was already time to go home, and my phone had not lit up with alerts, it felt like stepping out of an unbelievable dream. But old reflexes stayed with me. During the first few nights, around 2 or 3 in the morning, I jolted awake, convinced something was wrong with the system. I reached for my phone and opened the alert dashboard out of habit. The screen was calm. No urgent emails, no red warnings, no calls from operations. Lying in the dark, I realized I had lived through 3 years without my mind ever truly resting. While I settled into my new rhythm, things at Atlas began slipping off track. Small glitches appeared in places people rarely noticed. Login delays. Reports are taking too long to run. The nightly batch jobs are missing their completion times. All of the little things I had always manually stabilized to keep the system running smoothly. An operations engineer, someone who had once asked me to explain a few lines of code, tried to dig into the documentation I left behind. But even with my notes, they could not replicate the chain of decisions I had carried in my head before touching a single command. Helena, in a series of emergency meetings, tried to save the system by suggesting they hire an outside consultant. But no one could take it on. No one understood the patchwork architecture I had kept alive through version after version. The tiny adjustments I made every week never fully made it into documentation. Not because I refused to write them, but because dozens of my documentation requests over 2 years were never approved. Yet now, Helena told the CFO the outages were happening because I had failed to document properly. A convenient way to shift blame onto someone who had already left and could not respond. The pressure grew when the first major client called. They asked why logins took twice as long. Why were financial reports missing deadlines? Why has a system once stable become unreliable? The account manager tried to reassure them, but even they were starting to worry. The CFO looked at the downtime graph and watched the curve rise day after day. Meetings grew more tense. Atlas, a company that had relied on one person for too long, now faced the consequences of that choice. I heard bits of this through a few people still inside, their messages carrying panic behind every word. But I did not answer. I was focused on building a new foundation with my new team. Working at Harbor Sentinel made me feel useful in the way I had always hoped. I was no longer a firefighter. I was building a fire break from the ground up. One afternoon, I had lunch with the team in the pantry. They asked about my classes at the community center, about the kids, and about why I volunteered. I told them I wanted the kids to know how to protect themselves in a risky world, and everyone listened with genuine interest. No interruptions, no dismissive comments. I realized I was in a place where people were treated like people. My phone buzzed nonstop on the table. When I looked down, most of the calls were from Atlas, along with a few numbers belonging to law offices I had never contacted. I didn't pick up the phone. I simply placed it face down. The people around me noticed, but didn't pry. I smiled, reminding myself that Atlas had chosen their path. And now I was walking my own. I knew those calls were only the beginning. But for the first time in 3 years, I was allowed to choose not to answer. And that was a completely new feeling. 3 days after I officially started at Harbor Sentinel, Atlas entered the exact cycle of failures I had been warning them about for 3 years. But this time, I was far away, hearing everything only through the calls I refused to answer. On the first day, while I was reviewing a new data flow design with the cloud security team, a former coworker suddenly messaged me. Logins are unusually slow. I knew immediately what was happening. Every week, the Atlas system needed a manual sequence realignment for the credential refresh process. If that step was skipped, everything would hit the same execution window and create a bottleneck. I had done that step by hand for 2 years, even though I had repeatedly proposed automating it, only to be denied because it was not in the budget. I had expected this to happen, but hearing that it finally did still left a heavy feeling in my chest. I was not pleased, but I did not feel responsible either. By late afternoon, support tickets were flooding in. Customer service agents who were usually gentle were now raising their voices at engineering. Drivers and operations partners called, asking why they could not log into the system. A normal workday had turned into a small storm. On the second day, the storm became a flood. Atlas logs were configured to rotate because storage resources were limited. But with the unexpected load spike from the day before, the logs were not cleared in time and started to overflow. With disks nearly full, several services were automatically killed by the system to reduce load. The nightly transaction processing jobs stalled halfway through. I could imagine the chaos inside the operations room. The people I once worked with were probably trying to restart the entire service cluster, the only tactic they knew. But restarting everything during a log overflow only makes the loop worse. A friend from operations texted me saying they were trying everything, but no one could pinpoint the root of the cascade. I looked at the message, then set my phone down. This was no longer my responsibility. The third day was when everything exploded. Financial news outlets began reporting a major outage at a large logistics platform provider. They did not name Atlas in the first headline, but anyone familiar with the industry knew exactly who they meant. Atlas stock dropped the moment markets opened. Regulatory agencies demanded full reports on the disruption and potential supply chain risks. In the Harbor Sentinel office, when a coworker pulled up an article and asked if I used to work there, I stayed silent. Not out of embarrassment, but because I knew what was coming next. By noon, Atlas held a closed meeting with legal. Helena, Cole, the CFO, and the in-house attorney all attended. I was not there, but later, thanks to an operations engineer, I could picture every word. The CFO demanded the root cause and asked whether I might have left a back door. Years of dedication reduced to a single suspicion. Cole pushed the meeting even further. What if we prove she sabotaged it? That would give them someone to blame and reduce their penalties. He used the language of someone who understood politics far better than engineering. Helena stayed silent for a few seconds, then said it was possible I had left something hard to detect. A young engineer in the room, someone I had mentored when he was new, shifted uncomfortably. He knew what they said was wrong, but he said nothing. That afternoon, Atlas sent an official letter through their lawyers to both me and Harbor Sentinel. It was wrapped in polite language, but the implication was sharp. They suggested I might have violated loyalty obligations and engaged in actions that affected Atlas's operations. They never stated it directly, but every sentence was crafted to plant the idea that I was the cause of the outage. Almost at the same time, several small news sites published anonymous leaks. A key employee left, and 3 days later, Atlas collapsed. The implication was cold and simple. Harbor Sentinel reacted faster than I expected. Their legal team pulled my entire offboarding log, account lock, timestamp, last login IP, authentication checkpoints. Everything showed I had zero access after my departure. They sent Atlas a brief response. There is no evidence of sabotage. If Atlas continues to defame our employee, we will countersue according to the law. Raphael called me into a meeting room and placed the email in front of me. He spoke calmly. We stand with you. It was the first time in years that someone from a company said that without trying to use me for their own benefit. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, everything from the past 3 days washed over me in a strange, heavy wave. My phone buzzed again, but this time the message came from someone I never expected. Noah. He had sent a short email. You were right. We are paying for not listening. I am sorry for staying silent that day. I read that line again and again. On the table was the deactivated Atlas badge. I stared at it for a long time, then at the streetlight reflections on my window. For the first time, I felt something bittersweet. Not because Atlas was falling apart, but because I could finally see everything clearly without being chained to an invisible sense of responsibility anymore. The next morning, when I walked into the Harbor Sentinel office, I saw a missed call from an unknown number and a text asking me to check my inbox. Sitting at the top was an email from someone I never imagined would contact me directly. Diane Keller, chair of the Atlas Board of Directors. Not HR, not legal, not Helena, the highest level. My chest tightened as I opened it. Diane did not threaten me. She did not mention legal obligations. She wrote that she wanted to speak with me directly about the current situation at Atlas and hoped I could spare a few minutes. The tone was calm, but underneath it was the pressure of someone forced to bend after watching their system collapse in front of customers and the press. I called her back after a brief hesitation. Her voice was low and steady. Mia, I understand this situation puts you in a difficult position. I will not deny we may have made incomplete assessments. She avoided the word apology, but I heard reluctance and worry in every sentence. She said Atlas was facing pressure from major clients, panicked shareholders, and regulators demanding a full report within 36 hours. She asked if I could assist as an emergency advisor. I did not answer immediately. I thought about 3 years of being drained, sleepless nights, ignored warnings, and being used as a shield every time something went wrong. I thought about HR's email saying I had chosen my own path as if the blame was mine alone. And then I thought about Noah and the operations people who had done nothing wrong but were now carrying the fallout. Finally, I stated my conditions clearly. The advisory fee would be $50,000 an hour, minimum 4 hours, paid up front. I would work remotely, only giving guidance. No logging in. No touching any part of the system because I had no obligations to them. They had to issue a public apology acknowledging that I had warned them and been ignored. And above all, Atlas must rebuild the entire security department with at least 6 people, with authority equal to product and finance. Helena and Cole could not be part of the decision-making for structure or hiring. Lastly, I required them to launch a burnout and mental health support program for engineering. I refused to let anyone become the broken version of myself I once was. Diane stayed silent for a long moment. Mia, these terms are outside standard scope, I replied immediately. I know. But that is the price of forcing one person to do the work of 6 for 3 years and then firing them in 3 minutes. I heard Diane exhale softly, as if she were weighing every remaining option and realizing Atlas had no path left. 2 hours later, Atlas held a closed meeting with the board to discuss my conditions. A former coworker who attended as a technical note-taker later told me what happened. The CFO was furious, red-faced. She is extorting us. But an older board member immediately pushed back. She is not. The system is collecting the debt. From every warning we ignored, Helena sat quietly, not daring to speak. The truth was too obvious. They needed me more than anyone else. By the end of the day, Diane emailed to accept every condition. The deposit would be wired within the hour. I stared at the screen, knowing the power game Atlas used to play had just flipped. The emergency session began the next morning. I joined the call from a small meeting room at Harbor Sentinel. On the other side was a full conference room. Helena, the CFO, the engineering leads, several product directors, and legal sitting in the back. The atmosphere looked like a crisis press briefing. I did not waste time. I opened a slide showing the failure chain and explained each loop that had led to the cascade. I told them to perform step A, then B, then C, exactly as documented last year, the very document they dismissed as not urgent. I said it plainly. You can follow the steps, but you must understand why you are doing them. If you do not understand, you have not fixed anything. Midway through the session, Helena unexpectedly spoke. Mia, I have a few things I want to say. Her voice trembled slightly, as if searching for a way to apologize without losing face. But I cut in before she could continue. We can save feelings for later. Right now is about customers and the system. It was not harsh. It was a boundary I should have drawn years ago. After 3 continuous hours, the Atlas dashboard shifted from red to yellow, then began showing patches of green. Service by service, stability returned. When the batch job succeeded for the first time in 3 days, the room on their side erupted into a collective sigh of relief. I looked at the engineering team and gave them my final line. I documented everything. The problem was never a lack of documentation. The problem was that no one read it. Helena lowered her head and the CFO avoided my eyes. When the call ended, 2 emails arrived at the same time. One confirmed the wire transfer. The other contained the draft of the public apology, stating clearly that I had raised concerns about system risks and had been disregarded. I read both and felt something in my chest finally loosen. Raphael stepped into the room, leaning against the doorframe. You all right? I looked at the whiteboard with the technical notes still hanging there and answered with a small smile. It is the first time I have ever fixed a system without feeling trapped inside it. After the consultation, I thought I would never have to think about Atlas again. But the aftermath of those 3 chaotic days lingered for weeks across the tech and finance world. News about the largest service disruption in Atlas history covered every major outlet. The market reacted brutally. Their stock lost nearly half its value in 3 days. Billions wiped from their market cap. Atlas did not collapse, but they were forced to bow their heads. One Monday morning, when I walked into the Harbor Sentinel office, Raphael handed me a financial newspaper he had just finished reading. On page 3 was Atlas's public apology. The wording was sanitized, corporate, and carefully edited. But one sentence pulled something in my chest. We acknowledge that we failed to properly evaluate the warnings raised by former security architect Mia Park. My name appeared in front of thousands of eyes across the financial world. For the first time, Atlas admitted the fault was theirs, not mine. That same week, Atlas announced they were hiring an entirely new security team, 6 positions at once, with a CISO reporting directly to the board. I stared at the announcement, unsure whether to laugh or feel sad. It was exactly what I had been asking for over 3 years, except now they were building it on the ruins of their own making. Harbor Sentinel did not miss the moment. Raphael met with the leadership team and said that what Atlas went through should be a warning for the entire industry. He proposed launching an enterprise security advisory division, focused on helping companies avoid the same dependence on a single person. When he mentioned finding someone to lead the new division, every face turned toward me. I did not need to think long. For the first time, I wanted to do what had once seemed like a dream: build a real, sustainable security ecosystem. A few months later, I stood again on a conference stage, this time in Chicago, wearing a new badge with the Harbor Sentinel logo. I looked at the packed audience and remembered myself a year earlier in Las Vegas, exhausted but still smiling through it. The talk this time was titled, "Do Not Build a System That Depends on a Lone Savior." Every slide was a clear warning. If a company places its entire operation on one set of shoulders, failure becomes a matter of time. I presented an anonymous case study of a large logistics company that ignored internal warnings. The room fell silent. No one said Atlas, but everyone knew. I did not exaggerate a single detail. I simply described events exactly as they happened. Warnings are delayed to the next quarter. Documentation no one reads. Endless on-call nights. I did not try to wound anyone, but sometimes the truth cuts sharper than blame. When I stepped off the stage, a small group waited. I recognized Helena instantly. She looked nothing like the confident, guarded leader from Atlas. She looked smaller, unsure. She spoke first. Your talk hit the exact place it needed to. We made the changes you once proposed. We should have done it sooner. I nodded. If conversations like this had happened 3 years ago, it would have hurt so much less for all of us. Helena lowered her head, as if finally understanding something she had ignored for too long. She had not lost to me in some competition. She lost because she refused to listen when there was still time. That evening, back in my hotel room, I opened my wallet. Inside were three things I always carried: the old Atlas badge, the badge from my first conference in Las Vegas, and the drawing of a shield by the immigrant community student. Three fragments of three versions of me: the exhausted one, the one beginning to be seen, and the one who had found her worth. I took the Atlas badge out, placed it in a small envelope, and tucked it into the back drawer of the desk. A small gesture, but to me it felt like closing a door that had weighed on my shoulders for far too long. A few days later, Harbor Sentinel held a small celebration for the new advisory division and its first contracts. 20 people sat around a long table. No laptops open, no alerts, no work messages. We talked about the community classes, weekend trips, and personal plans that did not require sacrifice. I looked at my team: independent, sharp, capable, but none of them were forced into being a firefighter. No one is carrying a burden without their name on it. No one is treated as expendable. When the glasses clinked, my chest felt lighter than it ever had. I did not need Atlas to fall. I did not need them to kneel or beg. I only needed to stand in the right place, a place where my value was seen, respected, and paid for, with recognition and understanding. And maybe that was the real victory, because I knew one thing that would follow Atlas for years. They would spend a long time rebuilding trust, and every time they read news about Harbor Sentinel's rising success, about the advisory division I led, about the talks I gave at major conferences, they would remember the lesson they learned at the cost of a crisis. As for me, I had found a place where I no longer needed to explain why I deserved to be there, no longer needed to prove my worth, no longer needed to fight to survive. Sometimes revenge is not watching them fall. It is walking so far ahead that every time they see your success, they have to ask themselves in quiet regret, if only we had known how to value her then.